Regina, Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo, estes nostra salve.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You lock the kingdom of heaven before men. You do not enter yourselves, nor do you allow entrance to those trying to enter. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You traverse sea and land to make one convert, and then, when it happens, you make him a child of Gehenna, twice as much as yourselves. Woe to you, blind guides, you say, if one swears by the temple, it means nothing, but if one swears by the gold of the temple, one is obliged. Blind fools, which is greater, the gold or the temple that made the gold sacred? And you say, if one swears by the altar, it means nothing. But if one swears by the gifts on the altar, one is obliged. You blind guides, which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? One who swears by the altar swears by it and all that is upon it. And one who swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. One who swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who is seated on it." The Gospel of the Lord.
Just think for a minute and imagine being called by Jesus a hypocrite, not just once, but 3 times. When I was looking at this passage this morning, what struck me is that the core of the hypocrisy of the scribes and the Pharisees is all about self-interest. It's the anti-Trinity. Me, myself, and I. Conversely, the feast we celebrate today, Saint Monica, is a woman who was pretty much totally self-giving. She was in a terrible marriage, and yet she kept praying for her husband. That's one of those things that most people don't realize. She's, everybody talks about St. Augustine, her son, whom, of course, was a great difficulty for her, and she prayed incredibly for him. And he would become baptized and converted, and arguably perhaps one of the most prolific writers of our church. And you see, as St. Paul says, we pray for you always. The self-giving power of prayer, of intercessory prayer that keeps on going in faith, not necessarily looking for the results I want, but the prayer that surrenders the one I love and myself to God. And there she is. And Monica's husband, he would also later in life experience conversion and baptism, finding his way to Christ, led by Christ, and I'm sure with a great push from her intercessory prayer. In many ways, he would have been a husband who was not considered worthy of love, and yet she loved him nevertheless, and probably prayed him into heaven, as she did her son, who gave her many sorrows, but would finish in giving her many consolations. And so when we turn away from our self-interest, it's amazing what the power of grace can do when unleashed through our self-giving.
Regina Celi, letare